The New York Jets have found their GM. Hello and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Friday, January 24th. This is episode 478 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast, and we've got some breaking New York Jets news to discuss, as Darren Muji has been hired as the next New York Jets general manager to pair with head coach Aaron Glenn. And now the two biggest pieces to this new regime are in place. We've got a Glenn Muji regime here for the New York Jets. Appreciate all of those tuning in. Make sure to please like and subscribe. For those on YouTube, just 3 subs away from hitting 500. Of course, thank you to all those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms as well. Another breaking news episode here, as it's a busy week that comes to a close with some more news here for the New York Jets. It was reported just a little bit ago from Josina Anderson, a high-level league source, tells me Denver Broncos assistant GM Darren Muji is getting the Jets GM job, and that's the move they make. That's the decision they make. We knew that it was going to be either yesterday, today. You kind of backtrack a little bit here on this general manager process as a whole before we get into Darren Muji and what he brings to the table coming over from the Denver Broncos here. You heard on Tuesday, right? Aaron Glenn and Lance Newmark interview in person. Glenn gets the job on Wednesday. Newmark does not. You hear on Wednesday afternoon, shortly after Aaron Glenn got the job, that Newmark would still be a finalist, but that they were still going to interview some other candidates for the Jets GM position. It felt like it was going to be Newmark and Glenn as a tandem get hired together, and we move forward with that. And instead, that wasn't the case. The New York Jets then yesterday interviewed Trey Brown and Darren Muji in person at One Jets Drive. Came down to 3 finalists, Newmark, Brown, and they make the decision here Friday afternoon to bring in Darren Muji. And we talked about it yesterday, the 3 finalists being revealed, and it felt like, I mentioned this yesterday, I think a lot of Jet fans got this feeling as well, that it was going to be either Muji or Trey Brown, just because of the fact that if Lance Newmark was that close with Aaron Glenn and there was that strong of a connection from their days in Detroit together prior to Newmark taking the assistant GM position at the Commanders, and the interview on Tuesday went well enough, Newmark would have just been hired right when Glenn was hired as well. They would have been a package deal. So you knew that it was going to probably be either Brown or Muji. And what made Muji such a predictable candidate over the last 24 hours or so is his connections with Sean Payton, who is very close to Aaron Glenn. And you hear a lot of reports coming out of Denver that Muji is very close with Sean Payton, one of Glenn's biggest connections that he has, of course, coaching under him from 2016 to 2020 while they were in New Orleans. So it feels like that connection, Payton liking Muji, Glenn understanding that, it feels like that's a connection there, and that's a match that felt like was going to happen, and that was the advantage over Newmark and even Trey Brown, who I never felt like was really, really realistic. It felt like it was going to be Muji, and if not, they probably would have just hired Newmark, although whatever happened at that interview, I don't know what happened, but whatever it was, it didn't go well enough because he would have just been hired if it did go well enough. So Trey Brown, Newmark are the odd mans out here. When you look at, Darren Muji, you look at his resume here as an executive, we'll throw it up here on the screen, right? He's been around for 13 years. Denver Broncos 2012, all of them has been with the Broncos here for his 13 years. Started in 2012 as an intern, 2013 moved to personnel and scouting assistant. 2014 was a college and pro personnel scout. Then from 2015 to 2019, he got promoted to an area scout. 2020 was an assistant director of college scouting. 2021 director of player personnel. And then over the last 3 seasons, he's been promoted here to assistant general manager. You hear around the league with Muji, right? He's a first-time guy, first-time GM, has spent all 13 years in one spot. You hear around the league that this is a guy that deserves an opportunity and should get an opportunity, and a guy that a lot of people feel has a lot of positives traits that he can bring with him. Look, it's a first-time guy, and there's a ton of unknowns that come with a first-time general manager. There's also unknowns that come with a first-time head coach. There's going to be unknowns that come with a first-time head coach and GM, a first-time regime in general, which I don't completely love. I wanted experience. The Jets go inexperienced at both positions. But I think, again, the importance of Glenn's coaching staff rises up, and the importance of the rest of the front office as well continues to rise on bringing in experienced guys to help Glenn and Muji really get this thing on track and really build this thing from the ground up. He started out as an intern, worked all the way up, heavy scouting background. That was kind of the big thing. I think that you separate all of these three candidates in terms of the heaviest scouting background and stuff like that. Muji was that guy. You hear some of the things he's done in Denver. He's been a big help for Sean Payton, has been a big help for that front office. Feels like it's the right time for him to get that opportunity. That's what a lot of feel around the league. It's all unknowns. It's an unknown, as we know. I will say this about Darren Muji. He's 6'6", Aaron Glenn's 5'9". So you are going to see a very large difference when the two of those guys are out at one Jets drive on the practice field together. There is going to be a massive size difference between the two of them because Muji is huge. And there was an earthquake earlier today in the Jersey, New York area. That was just Darren Muji landing. He is a massive individual, 6'6". Used to play 2 seasons in the practice squad in the NFL with the Cardinals or the Falcons and the Cardinals after going undrafted out of San Diego State in 2009. Here takes over as the general manager about a decade plus later. I think something too that's interesting with Muji and just interesting from the Broncos looking at his background here, right? He's coming from an organization in Denver that he's just seen a turnaround. He saw a Super Bowl, right? Been there for a Super Bowl. He's seen the rebuild. He's seen them come out of the rebuild. I think that's important. He was actually close with Kevin O'Connell. He was his roommate in college with Kevin O'Connell. And when the Broncos went to go hire in 2022, their new head coach, he wanted Kevin O'Connell. And they ended up going and obviously hiring Nathaniel Hackett. They passed up on O'Connell and Dan Quinn because they wanted Hackett. Not a great decision. But Muji wanted O'Connell. Hindsight 2020, they should have went a different direction. Either way, though, Denver now obviously has Sean Payton, so it's working out fine for them. They make the playoffs this year. You've got a franchise quarterback and a really good head coach with Nixon Payton. But something I think is interesting, right? You look at Denver's situation this year. They were still paying Russell Wilson $39 million. And even after a failed 2-year kind of win now window that they tried to put together with Russell Wilson, which saw Nathaniel Hackett fail in year 1 and then Sean Payton, not have success with him in year 2. After you saw that happen, a lot of times things can completely collapse, and you have to give credit to Denver. And I think this could be valuable here for the Jets, especially post Rodgers era, whenever that might be, on having a tough cap hits with players that move on and still being able to formulate and put together a roster that can compete, right? On the outside, you look at what happened in Denver and you say, Russell Wilson obviously was a disaster there. And you say to yourself, they're going to, struggle the next couple years with the ramifications and what comes next, finding the next quarterback. But instead, 1 year later, they're in the playoffs. And they were able to still build a team despite that happening. And the Jets might find themselves in that situation here, especially post Aaron Rodgers era. Next year, if they're going to have to draft a quarterback, ideally Muji can take what took place in Denver moving on from Russell Wilson and take that and find your next quarterback and find your future and be able to build a winner even beyond this year, even if Rodgers comes back for one season. Maybe you find your quarterback in this draft and then you're able to build around him properly moving forward, similar to the transition that Denver just went through after that 2-year thing. So an interesting note there, just trying to kind of break down and dissect what he can take there, apply it here. We don't know, though. At the end of the day, we don't know how this is all going to work out. I like Glenn more than I like Muji. I think just Glenn's a lot more, just head coaches in general, you typically know a lot more about, and you typically know what to expect more. General managers are oftentimes, especially first timers, at least guys that have been GMs before, you definitely get a good idea of their philosophies. But new GMs in general, you sometimes don't quite know their philosophies. Like, you understand, you either have your scouting guy or your analytical, more financials guy. Muji's more of your scouting guy, not really your financials guy. You kind of understand that, but other than that, you do it. There's always a lot of questions, and I would say this. I think what's important, and I would be interested in seeing if the Jets can do this or if they will do this. I talk about it here in the open, just the importance of now bringing in veteran experience into this building, because you don't have it at the GM, you don't have it at the head coach spot. Nothing against Muji and Glenn. They're two qualified candidates, but where this Jets team is right now and the risk you're taking with two first-time guys in this market, I would be totally on board with if they can potentially, I don't know, bring in a John Dorsey, let's say. I don't know, John Dorsey. I would also say Chris Spielman from the Lions to maybe come over here and help them out. Dorsey, former GM, has been with the Lions the last couple of years now. Chris Spielman, we talked about it a lot. He led Brad. He kind of laid the foundation for Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. He led that coaching search. He was the one that basically hired both those guys. He's kind of like he oversees kind of like everything there. To kind of bring him in here and oversee things and help them out, I think would be certainly a positive. The only thing is, I don't know if I necessarily see that happening. And I would also say this. I don't know if John Dorsey or even a Chris Spielman would be willing to come here just for lateral moves. Basically assistants in the front office, which is what they are now in Detroit. I don't know if they would want to do that. They interviewed Spielman. Would that be something that they're interested to do, just, to join Glenn and have that connection? We'll see. Maybe they hold on to Phil Savage, a guy with a long experience in football and NFL and scouting, and interim GM for the Jets after Douglas was fired last year. I think Phil Savage, I wouldn't be against keeping him around, just as an experienced voice that can, lead a little bit and help out these guys. Dimitroff, maybe. I don't think it happens, because if they really wanted Dimitroff, they would have just hired him. I don't think, Dimitrov's not going to probably interview for the job and then say, oh, I'll take a lesser role to come and help this guy out. No, I don't see that. Like, Dimitroff, I think, would probably be like, look, if you really wanted me, you would have hired me for general manager. So I don't see that happening. But I would like to see at least a former GM or a guy like Phil Savage or somebody like that that's been around for a long time that can help these guys and assist and be a voice and be somebody to rely on, rather than these guys really just learning on the job with nobody really around them to kind of help them out in a way. And I trust that Glenn will do that. It feels like, they're going to hone in and get Steve Wilkes. I like that idea. Some of these other experienced guys, and Mike Westhoff, he's not going to come out of retirement, but we did hear that he's going to help Glenn assemble his staff and help him, through this, process here. And really, as they start to lay the foundation, that's, I think, a really good outlet and a really good voice for Glenn to have. Next is what they're going to do here in the front office around Muji, and hopefully, hire him, put experience around him to help him out. I think that's what you need, because otherwise you're in it's a very difficult for two guys to completely learn on the job here with not much experience around him with this team in this market. It's a lot. And, we saw this past regime learn the hard way with that. Both staffs, front office and coaching staffs, were terrible around Douglas and Saleh. Glenn and Muji need to learn from that and recognize that. And hopefully they do. So let me know what you think in the comments section down below about Darren Muji and the hire here. It feels, I'll be honest, he was not my prediction at first. It's definitely a little bit of a surprise. I definitely think, too, it felt like for a while there, Newmark and Glenn was going to be the guys. But obviously something happened with, you heard the reports that Newmark was going to potentially be the Raiders GM if Ben Johnson took that job there. You do wonder if maybe Glenn, not that he doesn't like Newmark, but you do wonder if Glenn maybe was kind of like to the Jets, like, hey, I don't need Newmark to be my GM. Let's bring in a couple other finalists and we can make a decision that way, or whatever. Second interview, they were not impressed at all with Newmark and they completely changed their mind. Whatever happened, something happened there because it felt like for a while that was the clear favorite. And then they turn around, hire two new guys, and they interview one of the guys that they just, interviewed, or hire one of the guys that they just interviewed. And that's Darren Muji. So connection there with, Glenn through Peyton. He's a qualified candidate. You just hope it works. First time guy, got to hire experience around him. That's crucial for both of these guys. And we'll see the staff, we'll see the front office continue to assemble here over the next week or so, continuing to be rumblings on Nick Caley and Steve Wilkes and the rest of the Aaron Glenn staff. So that's all stuff will all continue to come out here, and we'll obviously talk about it all here on the podcast as this new regime lays their foundation. And on Monday, Glenn will have his press conference. I believe Muji might have his press conference there as well. We will see. But a new era is upon us at One Jets Drive. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Appreciate the support as always. And until next time, JETS, 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 Jets.